The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's APM webinar, Mindsets, Mental Toughness for Challenging Times, with our guest speaker Lucy Finney, MBE from Underscore Group. I'm Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. It's great to see so many people online today, and I hope this finds you well. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and you are currently in listening mode. That's not to say that you can't get involved in today's webinar. On your control panel, you'll find a Q&A function. Please submit your questions now and Lucy will happily answer these at the end of the presentation. This session will count towards your CPD and should last up to an hour. I would like to say a special thanks to the volunteers of the SIG and branches within the APM who have kindly worked with our speakers to make these webinars possible. So, Lucy is Head of Leadership Development at Underscore Group, a specialist business transformation consultancy. Lucy is passionate about leadership development, building high-performing teams, mental toughness, and the use of psychometrics in personnel, leadership, and team coaching. With that in mind, and with no further ado, I'd like to pass over to Lucy for today's presentation. Lucy, thank you for giving today's presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, and nice to meet you all, and thank you for dialing into this webinar. So how I'm going to approach this is I'm going to cover 4 topics in the next over the next hour. First one I'll be looking at is mental toughness. What is it, and how do we define it, and its history? Where on earth did it come from? What is this subject? Then I'm going to look a little deeper into something called the 4 C's of mental toughness. I'll explain to you how mental toughness is measured. And then I would like to, together, I will introduce some information on and explore mental toughness and its application to crisis management, but then I want to open up so we can perhaps have a good discussion around the subject. So, a little bit about me first. I thought I'd better put in here, just to explain who am I and why I'm on this webinar talking to you about mental toughness. I guess the first part in my history to look at will be this one up here. This is a picture of the Omagh bomb in Northern Ireland. I am from Northern Ireland and grew up in the troubles of Northern Ireland. For me, the norm actually was people, believe it or not, bombing each other, people killing each other. This was going on all around us day to day. It was the norm for us. And this is the first thing, when I was that young, I think it began to develop that form of mental strength. It wasn't until I came out of Northern Ireland that I began to think, what is this that I've developed? What is this, as we now term, resilience that I had developed? I went along to Loughborough University and studied PE sports science there and recreation management. And there I began to get interested in the science of performance and sports psychology. Now that's relevant because that actually is part of the history of the development of mental toughness. And there is, of course, it was a very competitive university, so challenge was very much at the forefront of my mindset there. I love challenge. I love to achieve, and I love to get out there, and I love to be involved in any and every kind of sport and outdoor pursuits that I could do. Follow on from that, you have myself there doing various outdoor activities, preparing for expeditions. This is before I joined the army. Also being learning to be an outdoor pursuits instructor. And then also when I joined the army, I actually ended up becoming a caving instructor and a mountain instructor. So the outdoor field also played into this concept of mental toughness. So that's another thing that back then, in those days, we probably termed it a little bit of character building is what it was called, but actually it's evolved into a full concept now, as I'll explain in this webinar. The other pictures you can see there before you are actually once I entered the military. I have a full career in the Army. I was an Army Educational and Training Services officer who specialised in the middle, and I did a Master's in Design of Information Systems. What you're seeing on the left here is a picture of Mostar as I saw it. My operational experience was in the Balkans. When I first went into the kind of operational theatre, having not long passed out of Sandhurst, what I saw there was devastation, ruin, My whole concept of what was normal was even blowing more because there were no roads, no lights, very little water. People really had suffered there. But yet I saw in there people being resilient and strong and rebuilding. And that really has continued to fascinate me, the psychology of how people build strength and overcome such adversity. Using my Master's in Design of Information Systems, I went on in the rest of my career in the Army to combine education with actually, believe it or not, with command and control information systems and the psychology of stress that people went through on operations and exercises. And you can see here on the right, this is part of an exercise where we were actually doing an operational analysis on the stress that people experienced and their mental toughness during a global exercise. I also got involved in a whole side of when you start to bring in automated vehicles and artificial intelligence. So I have this strange mix in me, which has come from that troubles in Northern Ireland, has come from being doing sports at university, outdoor pursuits, military experience, and real operational IT experience. And I kind of combined all those at the end of my career. What you see on the right here is just me getting my MBA for the transformation and modernization of training in the British Army, where I brought together a whole training at that time was very much done face-to-face, and believe it or not, this is back in 2004. I generated the first concept of delivering virtual training using distance tools within the military, and that is now gone on to support millions of users worldwide. So out of all of that, I just wanted to say that I am not an academic, I'm a practitioner. And what I really want to do in this webinar is, since leaving the Army, I have picked up many, many qualifications around psychology and the use of psychometrics, and I've applied all this together to bring to you my thoughts on what mental toughness is and why it's useful today. So going on from there, what I'd like to look at is a little bit on the definition and history of what is this all about, what is this subject. So mental toughness determines how individuals perform when exposed to stress, pressure, and challenge. Quite simply, it is frequently used to refer to any set of positive attributes that help a person to cope with difficult situations. It's not a subject that has just been defined and that's it, that's all there is to it. It is a growing subject. It is a subject that has got many parts, as you'll see. I'll show you the evolution of it in a moment. It's got many elements that get added to it that are actually beginning to get a deeper understanding of what the overall subject of mental toughness actually is. So if we look at a few concepts around it, we'll begin to understand where it evolved from. Part of mental toughness is resilience. And resilience is defined as the ability to recover quickly from change, setback, or misfortune. When I'm doing this in a classroom or training on this in a classroom, sometimes what I do is I show you, you may have one of those sponge balls, and when you squeeze the sponge ball and you release it, it just relaxes, it bounces back to the way it was before. It regains its strength, it regains its overall shape, and it's back to where it was and ready to bounce back and then perform again. But if we add in a concept to this, which is one of anti-fragility. So this is the opposite of fragile. And this concept comes from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, that's at the bottom. If any of you are interested in it, he has written a book on anti-fragility. And this is where he actually says that when the bounce back happens, so resilience is about resist shock and stays the same, but anti-fragile gets better. He talks about mindsets in this and talks about how people benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, and disorder, and stressors. People actually who are anti-fragile love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. So that's an interesting concept that was thrown into the pot of mental toughness. Things that are anti-fragile benefit from randomness, uncertainty, variation, because that's the situation in which they thrive. So mental toughness itself was first defined by Jim Lower, who was an American athletes coach, and he was the first one to actually name the phrase mental toughness. And he actually took it further and said it's not just your ability to get better, it's your ability to consistently perform towards the upper range of your capabilities regardless of circumstance. So if you think back to where this whole concept evolved initially out of sport and out of outdoor pursuits, activities, and then into the business world. But actually, it comes from that concept of trying to get an athlete to perform at the top of his or her game and consistently, that's really important, consistently perform at that level. So we have mental toughness at this sort of three things here: resilience, the idea of resilience, the idea of anti-fragility, and then mental toughness. But to go a little deeper into this and give you just a bit more about the background and start to explain what is actually within the current thinking on mental toughness, to say it first emerged from the health sector, where resilience was defined as a combination of two things: commitment, that's a desire to continue, and control, your ability to continue. So a person responded with grit to a treatment to try and get better, with a mindset that I will get better. May not enjoy this process, but I will get better. I have commitment. I want to continue to live. I want to, and I have the ability to continue. Is within my control. This was picked up in the academic world through then by Susan Kabasa, who actually did some leadership research, and she discovered that resilient people have an added factor. Truly resilient people have a positive mindset. They are resilient, but they also like the challenge, and that's what I mentioned before. They have this anti-fragility thing in there too. They like the challenge of adversity and setbacks. Resilient people will take risks, will sometimes go down the road less traveled. They have a hardiness about them. Again, when I'm using terms like this, okay, thinking where this whole concept evolved from, things like grit and hardiness at this time were in sport and outdoor activities. So they're terms that really hit and landed well. Dean Spear, who was an experiential outdoor development expert, he then did some experiments, and this is where he began to shape the links up between physical performance and mental performance. Obviously, he's created a statement there which wasn't really known at the time, but he found that he discovered that physically fit people were able to focus better. And what he actually found was that he took several groups of people out into the mountains over a period of 3 days and did mathematical tests on them. He found at the end of the 3 days, they performed better at the mathematical questions than before. So that physical activity was began to be linked to the mental. At this point, sports people were really concentrating on improving their performance through their physical activity, not so much on their mental. Then along came Jim Lower, as I mentioned before, and he stated that we must work on both our mental as well as our physical fitness. Now, we kind of take that for granted now, but bearing in mind I'm introducing the concept here, this started to then come in as we must equally work on our mental fitness as well as our physical fitness to perform at the top of our game. It's actually a video, if any of you are interested, on YouTube, where he goes through stress is not the bad guy. And it's a very good, short, simple, but a little bit old, but it's actually very relevant, and explains how we traditionally think of stress being, we label our feelings inside when we're worried as stress, but actually it's about the mindset. And it's our mindset that's causing those inner stresses, not necessarily what's happening around us. But he was the first to come up with the term mental toughness. And then finally, Peter Clough at Hull University, he conducted some experiments on the UK leaders in the UK customs and excise operations. And he identified that confidence in your ability to achieve things was a missing ingredient in the definition of mental toughness. So Peter is the one that's done a lot of work recently with a lot of academics on this subject to evolve it into actually what is a psychometric now. There's a psychometric behind this. That a lot of, he identified the factors that are involved in mental toughness. He collated this information I'm showing you now. And the 4 C's of mental toughness are built around commitment, control, challenge, and confidence. You'll see in the model words appear later on like grit positive, hardiness, focus. These are all things that have evolved in the journey to get to today's definition of mental toughness. And the psychometric I referred to is one that evolved out of Peter's work. The mental toughness quotient, MTQ48, is being now researched and proven to be a valid and reliable psychometric. I'm actually a practitioner in the psychometric, I'm a practitioner actually in 8 psychometrics altogether. And I want to bring some of that knowledge to you today. So to round off that a little bit here, studies have shown there's a strong link between mental toughness and performance, which you've mentioned. So you now know, if you think of those top athletes, those top teams that go to the Olympics, those top players now at the moment, top of their game, the top golfers, the top sports drivers, they all perform consistently. That's the thing, at the high end of their ability. There's also strong links between mindset. So under stress, there is a strong element of proactive, positive thinking in mental toughness. There's also a component in mental toughness. Research has been done on well-being, and as I'll introduce you later on to, there are topics like anxiety control that are involved there, and mindfulness is actually part of mental toughness. So there's been a proven link between developing your components of mental toughness and your well-being improving. Achievement is an important part of mental toughness, so it's that seeking to optimize your potential, sticking at something, seeking to complete it. Employability has also been linked, so the confidence that you have when job seeking. And there's a higher completion rate amongst people with higher levels of mental toughness, seeing things through to the finish, than those with a more fragile, lower levels of mental toughness. And there's an openness to change as well about those people, and an ability to transition. So that's a little journey through where this concept has evolved from. So sports really, in fact, the health field kicked it off initially, then sports picked it up, then it was used in outdoor pursuits. In many ways, I'm talking to many people on this webinar, and many of you will have been developing your mental toughness over the years, and there may well be psychologists out there as well. You will all talk, think, explore mental toughness. We may not have put the name mental toughness on it, but you have been exploring it and developing it. What I'm passionate about is that this is one of the first models I've kind of come across that has summed it up and brought a lot of it together. So it's a psychometric plus other elements. It goes beyond just the psychometric in its construction. So let's look at the 4 C's of mental toughness. What are they? What are they about? So confidence is about your self-belief and how you manage your interpersonal relationships. Control is about your emotions and the extent of control you feel over your life. Commitment is about a proactive mindset. You enjoy going after goals and targets. You are up for them, and that's the kind of mindset that you have, that achievement mindset. And challenge is about seeing the world in a positive way, seeing opportunities, not threats. So if we look again just at these a little bit more detail, confidence. When we talk about confidence in the mental toughness model, we're talking about self-awareness, your level of awareness of yourself and your behaviors and your personality, but also self-belief. Do you have belief in yourself that you can achieve things? Do you have that confidence that you can achieve things? Are you able to control your doubts? And it's personal confidence and also confidence when you are interacting with other people, getting that balance right, respecting other people and working with other people to achieve a sort of greater good. Control. In here is being able to control your emotions. And what I mean there, it's under a stress situation. So how can you control those emotions that will prevent you from being able to perform under a stressful situation? And how much we believe we can shape what's happening around us. So it's, if we think of things like, if any of you are familiar with Stephen Covey's circle of control, if not, if you Google it, you will see it's very interesting and a great concept. It's how he talks about us having at the center an area of control around us. And in that sort of bubble are the things that we can actually control. And the next circle outside is an area of influence, and that's things we can influence. And then there's another circle outside, which is things, well, in fact, it goes to infinity, things that we cannot control. And what we're talking about here in control is not just the things that you can control in your life, but also how you can then be more assertive and push out into that influence sphere. So some things aren't directly under your control, but you can go and influence them. So this moves across then into the commitment area, which is how do we respond to goals and targets? Do we have tenacity and stickability? Again, if you think back to the sports world, no top sportsman has got to, or woman has got to where they are without tenacity and stickability, without trying, accepting that they'll fail, learning and moving forward. But their mindset is they are committed to get to the goal that they want to get to. And challenge is very much an interesting one to say that came along towards the end, which is seeing the world in a positive way. So it's about looking at any situation and any scenario that you're in and not focusing on the fear, but focusing on the opportunity that exists within that. Because it's by focusing on the opportunity that we end up reducing that fear. So a huge part of mental toughness is about where you focus your mind in any given situation. So we talk about confidence and control as inner strength, commitment and challenge as outer strength. So this is the model now that sort of the first level summary really of mental toughness. You can see some of the topic areas there. So we now have, we've still got the inner strength and outer strength that I mentioned a moment ago. But you'll see up here, self-efficacy has appeared, which is that self-belief. The grit, the word grit is here, appeared again, which is taking control into commitment and really sticking at it. We have aspiration down the side here, which is really aspiring to something better, aspiring to greater things, aspiring to achievement. And engagement, when we bring confidence into this whole sphere, we're engaged in what was happening with us in the outside world. We're not cutting ourselves off. So the topics that we kind of talk about, and when we do our sort of training around mental toughness, we work on people's confidence in their own abilities, their interpersonal confidence. We then work on an area of emotional control. Now on that emotional control, I probably dip back into my military training there and the training of anybody who's in a crisis response team or anybody who's doing emergency service type activity. And any of you on there may have background in this, and you'll understand when I say when you go through your basic training for whatever those services are, those forces are, you learn about stretch. You learn about the reason you do exercises and operational commitments and go out into live situations is you always come back, you always reflect, and you always learn. And you learn more each time the stretch goes further out. You learn more about your emotions and how you react under stress. And you learn techniques to control your emotions in those stressful situations. So emotional control is about that zone that we get into where we will grow. But what's really important is that we reflect back all the time and learn in any situation of stretch we've gone into, we learn about our emotions and reflect what happened and learn to control them. Life control is still getting back towards that circle of control and how much you can push further out into influence and where you focus in terms of the things that you control and how that helps you to grow inner strength. Commitment, I mentioned already, goal orientation, achievement orientation, and an interesting one on challenge which particularly fascinates me at the moment, is that whole risk orientation. Your mindset, and I've trained hundreds of leaders over the years in my leadership development programs, and we talk about in project management, we talk about risk all the time, and I've been in many projects where people talk about it, they write a little risk register, and then they don't look at it, they don't follow it, they don't actively manage it. Whereas my belief is that, and certainly my experience and learning as a project manager, is actually that's a critical area. One is our attitude to risk. Two is our management of risk. And if we learn to focus on those things and try and manage that and de-risk situations, then we will actually, one, help our projects better, and two, are also our mindset. So understanding what risk's about, both from a point of view of managing as a process, but also from a mindset point of view, and understanding that you're up for a challenge. If you're risk-oriented and highly risk-oriented, you will be up for a challenge, but you have to get the balance right and not go too far. And that's where the learning orientation comes in, the other aspect of challenge. Act, do something, reflect, learn, grow. Take risks, be up for the challenge. Don't worry about failure, and that you learn from the situation and grow, and that's really a strong part of mental toughness. And really, without all four, we'd struggle. So let's move on now to talk about how you measure mental toughness. So now I'm just focusing a bit more on the MTQ-48 and what it's about and where it came from. Just something to point out here about personality and psychometrics. There are two types of psychometrics. There's a type-based psychometric, which tends to be more about you're born with certain personality characteristics, and those really underpin your behaviors. And there's a trait-based psychometrics, which says that things exist on a dimension. Type-based psychometrics would say you are either an extrovert or an introvert, whereas trait-based psychometrics say there is a spectrum and you may tend more towards extroversion or you may tend more towards introversion. So mental toughness is a personality trait. So that's an important thing to understand. And as it says in number 2 there, trait psychology rests on the idea we differ from one another in terms of where we stand on this set of basic trait dimensions. And there are many psychometrics out there which you will take, but you will see general patterns. If you take several types of psychometrics, you will see general patterns in your behavior. Traits are plastic. They do change with time. What you are when you were 4 years old is not the same as, hopefully, what you are when you're 40 years old. Life experience, background, education, all influence and shape the very person that we are, the traits that we have. But over time, personality does settle, and they do say at around 21, we do become 22, consistent and stabilize. And this is known as your personality preference, and that's what drives your actual behaviors, your thoughts and your feelings. So mental toughness is a model that's been designed that explains why when you put people with the same background, education, experience into a job, they do perform differently. So another thing to be aware of mental toughness as I'm talking about it is also underpinned by the big five, it's called, for those not familiar with psychology. To be honest with you, most psychometrics are underpinned by the 5-factor model. And an easy way to remember the 5-factor model, if anyone ever says to you the big five, is that word ocean. That stands for how openness is the first dimension. How open are we to experience? How closed are we to experience? Conscientious, how much do we work hard to achieve something, or how much do we prefer to flow? Extroversion, do we get our energy from the outside world, or introversion, the inner world? Agreeableness, do we tend to agree when things come up, so we're more convergent, or disagree, we're more divergent in our thinking? And neuroticism is that other side, that side of us that comes out when we're highly under stress. So those 5 things, the 5 dimensions, openness, conscientious, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, all underpin the psychometric. So as a factor of how to, if you're curious on how to measure mental toughness, as I say, there is a thing called MTQ48 or an NTQ+. They're 2 slightly different psychometric profiles, and they do, through a series of questions, you'll come to understand where your levels are, your strengths and weaknesses are around confidence, control, commitment, and challenge. Okay, so taking this into the final part of my webinar, mental toughness and crisis management. It's very interesting to be delivering a webinar and focusing on a subject during the COVID-19 crisis on mental toughness. Developing this program and putting this all together has certainly made me look back and reflect on myself and my own mental toughness. One of the best ways to learn about a subject actually is to teach about a subject. So I have been rapidly learning more and more and more every day. But with my background, I'm also interested in crisis management. A crisis emerges when we are in a sort of chaotic situation, when there's a lot of things around us that aren't controllable, that are highly unstructured. And one of the models that we use within our company, which is something I've created, is called the DNA of crisis management. So everything up to now has been about mental toughness and mindset. If we take that into this model and combine it, and this model is a mixture of behaviors and process to get you through a crisis situation. If I just explain it to you, this is a model that's evolved from my military background, and when we're training around crisis management, we combine both mental toughness and this model DNA of crisis management. So in a given situation that you go into, if you think of a military situation or a service emergency situation or where the NHS is right now, you will have at the very start a huge amount of intelligence gathering because you have no idea what's going on out there in the facts. You really need to you go out and gather the facts, do some operational analysis on the facts, assess the facts in the purest way they can. Right now, that you then bring that together, that intelligence together, and you try to understand the picture. And that is exactly what the NHS is trying to do in terms of, forgive me here, but gathering and understanding the number of deaths that are actually taking place in the world, in the UK or any given area. They are trying to create what is called a common operating picture. So they are gathering that intelligence, they're trying to gather factual data. They're then trying to work out patterns and understand what is actually happening to find ways to mitigate the situation and make critical decisions. And that is part of the DNA of crisis management. And that is the way that the military start in any operation when they go into it. They go in, gather intelligence, analyze it, assess it, try and understand it, come together at one point, all elements of a battle group, and try to understand what's the operating picture. To bring mental toughness back into this at this point, mental toughness is a strong component when you go into it about visualization and creative problem solving. It is one of the tools that is part of mental toughness kit bag. And that will help in this situation of crisis management. Also, when you think of that situation, when you're trying to gather the facts, actually having confidence to speak up, having an emotional control under intense, stressful situations, being committed to finding a solution, and being positive about an outcome. That's the challenge that you face, are all important mindsets to get through that difficult situation. And then you go into a cycle here, which is the red part of the cycle here is continuing on intelligence gathering all the way through. That's what we call the DNA. And this part here, once we've decided what to do, we need to plan, we need to align our teams, we need to execute, and we need to review. We need to learn. Teaming is here because it's just one other important concept I want to bring in here. From Amy Edmondson. If you Google Amy Edmondson, she's written some fantastic work around teaming for audacious innovation. She's done years of study on teams working in crisis scenarios, and she has 4 concepts, she says, around teaming, which are aim high, team up, prepare to fail, learn fast. And I think it's such an excellent 4 principles to follow when you're facing a crisis scenario. And so with a combination of these things, and what's down here lastly called your C4 leadership, there are elements of process you can put into controlling a crisis situation, which are around command, control, coordination, and communication. So this is a tool which I believe is a process, a mixture of process and behaviors combined with mental toughness. I kind of wanted to put it out there to project managers today to understand there are mindset, there are ways of thinking, there are ways of developing, there are processes to get through the crisis. And I'm particularly doing this webinar today because of that kind of crisis situation that we do exist within in the world today. And just to encourage you to think about developing your mental toughness and the aspects I've talked about today. Look to understand your behaviors when under pressure. Mental toughness is a thing that if you look into it more and research it more, elements of our mental toughness training are around anxiety control, attentional control. How do we get a proactive mindset? What is mindfulness? We're used to that one a lot. We've heard a lot about that, but have we heard about anxiety control, attentional control, and those other elements above? By training, by practicing, by trying things, develop your performance, your ability to perform at that higher level under stress. Again, there are techniques you can learn around focusing and goal setting, visualization, creative problem solving, and decision making under stress. So just to round off, just to point out that we do, if you visit our Underscore website, we do actually have 4 webinars, deeper dive, running at the moment around some of the topics on mental toughness. One on mindset and emotional control, decision making under stress, performance and fatigue, and one called A Brave New World, Mental Toughness Survival Skills. Those are each about 60 minutes long, but take you deeper into the subject. And finally, if you want to find out more, visit our website. Say we have virtual training on mental toughness, and also we've developed a crisis management and response toolkit. So we have virtual training programs on there. If you follow that link, which will be available through the APM afterwards. We also have virtual coaching, expert coaching is available, and any of the psychometrics I explained if anyone is interested and wishes to take a psychometric and learn about their mental toughness or learn more about their personality and their performance under stress to help you at the time, that can also be accessed, and we can do that. Okay, so that's kind of really run through an introduction to mental toughness for now. So I'd like to at this point ask if there are any questions.
Perfect. Firstly, thank you, Lucy. That's a really great presentation, and we've had over 300 people join us today, so hopefully they've got some key information to take away. So yeah, we've definitely received some questions. One of them is, with our current health challenge in mind, how can mental toughness actually help?
So I think the critical thing is to say mental toughness is a growing subject. There are many parts to it. It will help you if you do learn more about it to develop your own personal resilience. It will help you in terms of strengthening your confidence and your ability to face the crisis. It'll help you also in terms of how you really get that mindset right for what faces ahead. So our toolkit we've actually is crisis management and recovery. Or crisis management responses show up there. But that will actually help you to recover in terms of your business, to rebuild. One of the things we're thinking about is the crisis has begun. We've all kind of got through the first 3 weeks of lockdown. We may have more lockdown, well, we have more now, and we may have more after that. But we have to begin to think about how do we rebuild, how do we recover, how do we bring things back together again. And mental toughness is going to definitely be required in that rebuild part of business. So I think some of the things that you can learn in there about, I think probably the biggest thing I would say, the big concept in mental toughness is there is no such thing as failure. It is just learning, and we are in a climate where we each day we fear we might fail at something. Well, I would just throw that out the window, because it's not about failing, it's about learning.
Perfect, thank you. We've definitely received a lot more comments from people saying thank you. It's been a great presentation. So we've got Kirsten, who has said, hi, thank you for organising this. Very interesting subject. How do you work with people that are not mentally strong and resilient when you are not the most patient person? How can you change them and change yourself to adapt to their weaknesses?
Okay, so so I recently read something actually from an American psychologist, which was fantastic. And I think something is stuck in my head that he actually said was, now is a time to practice radical self-acceptance. And I think that's just like a really strong thing to say, because we all have different levels of resilience. We all have different levels of mental toughness. That first area around confidence is very much, we have different levels of confidence. Nobody is better than another. So it's about just respecting each other for where people are at right now. Okay, and when you say work with people who aren't strong and resilient, everybody needs to take a first step. And it's about breaking down in their way for where they're at and their time into some achievable task, some achievable step that they can make, and that will develop their resilience. That's the person you're working with. For yourself, it's again back to that radical self-acceptance. We all have it. We are where we are today. We all have the kit bag, the personal kit bag that we have, and we should seek to try and work with our strengths and build on those strengths. And then with curiosity, start to develop some other strengths. So find out more about tools that help your inner resilience, your inner mental toughness, because once you've got that and that confidence, then you can move forward more to help others.
Excellent, perfect, thank you. I'll try and combine a question from Andrew and Ryan. Hopefully I do them both justice, but it's how much do you believe that mental toughness is a factor of an individual's life experience rather than a theory-based techniques?
So we've got a question of how much. As I said at the start, I am not an academic. I'm a practitioner, so I'm sitting before you. I would say that your life experience is a huge part of your mental toughness. All that you've got, and I did say earlier about education in there, but I would say that people are mentally tough who perhaps haven't had the access to the best education in the world. So I wouldn't put that as being the cream of education that would say this because you've done that, you might be mentally tough. So I think it is about a combination of all those things that have happened to you in your life, good or bad, to a certain point will develop mental toughness. I think there's an element, and maybe it's, that 80-20, I don't know, 75% is life, 25% is this theory. I can only speak from experience of over the years, both my own and that of training hundreds of leaders. I think once you open people's minds to understanding that there are things, definite techniques, definite methods, definite ways in which you can help your brain to think differently and manage your emotions. Once people start to understand that and find a language for that and find tools and techniques, they can develop their mental toughness even better. So it's perhaps there are things we talk about when we do this training, which are wonky thinking or unhelpful thinking, and once people start to explain those things to you, you begin to recognize, I might be doing some of that, and that is limiting me. So I think it's a combination of a huge part of life, but then adding to it some enlightenment in terms of understanding. There's a lot of really good guidance out there to help you develop even further.
Perfect, thank you. So some people have asked, are there any books or any go-to reading that you personally go to cover this topic?
So I think what the best thing to do is if I could perhaps provide some of those for you that you could put with this when you put it up onto the APM website. Just thinking, you know, it's jumping to mind. There's Amy Edmondson has written so much on this. If you Google Amy Edmondson, she's written Teaming for Success. I think it's the Fearless Organization. She has also done a lot of fantastic webinars, not webinars, sorry, presentations, TED Talks. People who talk good mindset information is Simon Sinek. In terms of if mental toughness, the sort of if you Google and search for Peter Clock's guidance, he's at Hull University. He has written several articles and pieces on mental toughness. So that's just a sample of them.
Perfect, thank you. Lots of different medias there. So yeah, hopefully that will help. Hugo's asked, how much room is there to develop mental toughness later in life? Hugo's thinking especially of the transition from stable employment to running your own business.
So I think developing your mental toughness is all the way back, all through life. I think if you go into any situation, anything, with that learning mindset, which is hugely behind this, then you can develop hugely, because at any stage in your life, and I think a huge part of it is being aware and opening your eyes and realizing that there are these tools and techniques and methods out there. You know, a sports person really studies their sport through and through and their opposition. They study all of those. So does someone in the military going into any activity. You will study the enemy. You will understand your enemy. You will look around. You will use the tools that you've got. You use the experience you've got. But you don't just stop and say, that's all I've got. You constantly learn, constantly go out. You constantly look for good source of information. And I think on that point, that good source of information, it's a very personal thing. Mental toughness may be for some. I do think it's sort of courses at many areas, but you will all find your own kind of tool, technique, method out there that will really help you develop to survive some of the crisis scenarios that we're in. And that's particularly one about going out and job hunting. You just, you know, there's a huge element of understanding yourself. There's a huge element of being able to explain your strengths to other people, to continue to develop and to keep persevering. And you know, it is going to be very challenging ahead, but as long as you go into every situation, you do exactly what the military does. Do it. If you fail or pass, you need to go back, you need to reflect, you need to learn, and then you need to move to the next situation. Do not give up.
Perfect, thank you. A couple of people asked, yes, this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared on the APM website. Lucy's also kindly letting us put this on the APM YouTube channel, so you will be able to see this recording post-webinar. Peter has asked or said, doesn't openness imply a certain amount of vulnerability / creativity outside toughness?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to emphasize that the word toughness is to understand it came from sport. Okay, and it emerged out of that field, and that's where the term was coined as toughness. And sometimes that puts people off. Initially, when I first came to it, I thought, you know, that's maybe what you want to move against. But actually, no, that's the term that's been given to the overall domain I'm talking about. If we are, you know, not using the phrase mental toughness, you're doing leadership training and leadership development, absolutely, completely, your statement is right. So that's when I emphasized about in control. It's about controlling your emotions in stressful situations so that you can be helpful in that situation. It's not about being so controlled that you do not show openness, that you do not show that vulnerability. I think now, right now, in the conditions and situation we are in the world, it's really important to have that confidence to be open, to have that confidence to be vulnerable. that's part of it all as well. So please don't mix up the word toughness means close down and don't show. That's definitely not what it's about.
Perfect. Thank you for the answer and the clarity around toughness. We've got a question from Dave. How important do you think mental toughness is as a trait when considering a career in project management?
So I can, again, from a practitioner's point of view, I've been in some very difficult situations in projects as a project manager or as a business change manager. A large part of my career I was doing that within a huge defense company. I found myself in many, many tricky situations. And I would probably, I applied many of the tools we're talking about here into project management environments, but I didn't call them mental toughness at the time. When I left the army, I actually started off on a journey. I initially became qualified as an executive coach and mentor, and then I went and I'm an NLP practitioner and many psychometrics. And many years later, here I am. But I would say the one consistent thing I've used all the way through in project management has been coaching, and it has. Sorry, it's another one, which is really understanding the people that I'm working with, and just developing my own. You know, when we do training and leadership course for some customers, they have competencies in there, and the very first one is always about manage yourself before you go on to manage others. And I think those topics are all really relevant in project management, because project management is really about people and process, and we mustn't focus all the time on process. We need to work with the people to deliver the projects that we want to deliver.
Perfect, thank you. Not a question, but just a statement from Jacqueline. This was a great presentation. I really like the don't worry about failing. Think of it as a learning. She's literally just taken on a new role, and this is something that she's going to take forward with her. So she's very grateful for you sharing that.
Good, good.
Following on, John, do we live in a society that is too risk adverse and too resistant to the idea you can learn from failures?
That's a really interesting question. That I would say until what month? I've even lost track of the month.
April.
About 2 months ago, or 8 weeks ago, I would have said yes, we do. But with the speed of everything that has happened of recent, as I say, I spent many years running change programs that have taken many years to implement, and the speed and pace of change that has just occurred in the last 6 weeks is unbelievable. And it, as someone said, it just proves anyone who tells you that change can't happen, well, that myth just needs to die, because the speed at which we've all changed is huge, and what we've done and how we've adapted. So I think, but without people have definitely learned to live in a situation where there is much more risk around us because of the risk to personal health, the risk to our jobs, the risk to our finances, the risk everywhere. They've had to step back and they've had to contemplate that and find their own strategies for dealing with that. So I think people's mindsets towards risk, they will have become more comfortable now with dealing with risk, because when you're thrown in a crisis, you really stretch and you have to learn to do that. So beforehand, we had too many boundaries and too many things closing us down that made us frightened to go forward. Whereas I think that something that has come out of this situation is people now know they have to take risks. So they become more open to that.
Great, thank you. Sophie's asked, do you think mental toughness training should be offered by companies as a mandatory training course?
I would love to say yes. I'll tell you this, that so I had the shot up there of me when I got my MBE in the army, and I did one little psychometric test, and I didn't even get it done properly, and nobody explained it to me. I learned a lot about mental toughness just through sheer diligence and stickability and working at stuff. So when I left the army, I embarked on all these psychometrics. I embarked on finding out about NLP and executive coaching, because people told me that was something quite wise to go and find out. And I am quite passionate about the fact that I wish some people would teach this to people younger. because it's like you're sitting holding things that are very, very helpful, but people don't seem to value it enough, or they may value it more now, but they didn't in the past value it enough. So I do think it is something that is important to open people's minds to, because it helps them. And if you help the people in your work or in your projects, you will deliver better projects.
Great, thank you. I can see that we've got a couple more minutes left, so if you're happy to answer one or two more questions.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yes. Yeah.
So Peter has said, and if you don't mind sharing, have there been any times, Lucy, when you felt vulnerable or weak despite toughness?
Yes, of course there have. Where do I start? There were many times in the military, but I have to say, very early on, they do the process of training you when you're at Sandhurst is they do take you to that place where you really kind of understand that you are vulnerable, and then you develop strategies to cope with that. But when things suddenly appear in your life, there are situations that, family bereavements, and I'm talking personally, those sort of things really do kind of hit you, and you do feel vulnerable. At work situations that, as a female, even with all that strength that I might have, when you're put in certain circumstances, I have experienced at least 2 cases of severe bullying. So that's something that makes you feel very vulnerable, and you definitely, when I reflect back, think, I just needed more confidence at that time to really push back. I did it, but it required a lot of strength to do it. So you feel very vulnerable in those situations. And I think probably my learning out of all of those is that you may have, and you will, and face difficult and challenging things in your life, both personally and through at your work. But if you can develop that constant learning mindset, that give yourself time to recover from the situation, move forward a bit, step at a time, you'll build up pace, you'll get better, and when the next thing happens, you'll perform better given that same circumstance re-emerge. So obviously personal bereavements, things like that are not things to be shared on this, but yes, I've experienced some pretty drastic situations, and you just they do strip you back, and you just have to be open and honest about where you're at that given point in time.
Thank you for sharing and adding some additional information around that. I can see we've got literally a minute left, but I'll try and squeeze this question in. So, how do you help others to move away from fear of failure closer to preparing to fail or fail well?
I still have to reflect on that. It's like I said, there is actually a process called chunking, which is where you bring things in. When people fear failure, they're fearing not just what's immediately the first step, they're feeling the next step, and the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And it's about them actually learning how to chunk it down and take that first step. And if they fail, they realize it's not as bad as they thought it was. So we used to, a good sort of side story to show that is we used to take lots of our young apprentices in the company I was in to one of those outdoor development centres, and there used to be that pole that you would go up, like a telegraph pole, with only about a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot platform at the top. 4 people would have to go up, hold each other, lean out, and prepare to fall off. And I've had people at the bottom of that ladder who have been totally terrified at the time, the thought of standing at the top of the ladder with 4 people on such a small platform. And when you break it down, and I've physically done this several times, but you break it down and you say, okay, let's talk about this. And they've got the safety harness on, and they've got this, and they've got that. And they realize, okay, you only have to do one thing, and that's put your foot on that first rung. And then you talk them through the next and the next, and you see them gather confidence as they go up and think, you know what, I'm safe, I'm going to do this, get to the top, stand there, hold on, and fall off. But they do it. They go from being terrified of that first step to the next, because you showed them that when they made the first step, they were safe.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, and great example to give as well. So I could probably read about 4, 5, maybe more compliments from people saying it's a great webinar. Great to be talking about this topic at these challenging times. There's some additional questions as well, which I'll send to you after, Lucy, and if you can answer, we'll share those on the APM website. But I think from everyone at APM, our volunteers, and the people that have joined us today, thank you very much for giving up your time to share key knowledge with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you. It's everybody who's out there. What I haven't put on my screen is I can also be found on LinkedIn if people wish to join LinkedIn with me. I'm always up for conversations and always interested in connecting, so feel free to do that as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And
okay.
As we mentioned, we'll put some of this information on the APM website, and Lucy will share your details on there as well if you're happy for us to do that. Great. So just to let everyone know that we've got some great webinars coming up, which have been organised by the branch and SIGs, along with APM staff members, and we've got some great speakers. Definitely keep an eye on the APM website, but on the screen now are just some upcoming ones this week and next. We hope to see you at future webinars, and we hope everyone keeps well. So hopefully see you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.